All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really incredible story about the illusion of control, the desperate human search for meaning, and the unseen, completely invisible traps hidden in the dark corners of the internet. It's basically a step-by-step mapping of a complete digital and, honestly, psychological collapse. So let's get started.
I want you to picture this. It's exactly 6 a.m. The alarm clock doesn't just ring, it essentially detonates in the dead silence of the bedroom. It's this cold, synthetic shriek that violently yanks our main subject, a guy named Arthur, out of a deep, dreamless sleep. He just lies there, completely motionless for what feels like hours, staring up at this tiny hairline fracture in the plaster ceiling right above his head. You know that smell of stagnant dust and cold, damp air? That was the permanent aroma of his life, a life lived in absolute, crushing isolation. Every single morning began with this exhausting internal negotiation, just frantically searching for one valid reason to throw off his heavy wool blanket and face the gray, apathetic reality waiting right outside his window.
Part 1. The Endless Gray Loop.
To really understand Arthur, you need to understand his numbness. It stemmed from a tragic childhood collision that left him orphaned at just 9 years old. He was basically passed around distant relatives like unwanted luggage until ending up with an uncle who provided a roof, but literally zero affection. Now, this trauma didn't make him angry. It just made him completely numb. He grew into a man who simply didn't know how to hope. He didn't live, he just existed inside this agonizingly precise, sterile machine of a routine. I mean, look at this timeline. 6 a.m., the alarm goes off. By 6:05, his feet hit the exact same worn grooves in the hardwood floor. At 6:12, he's staring at his hollow face in the bathroom mirror under this awful flickering fluorescent bulb. By 6:30, he's drinking lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug, just staring at city streets that seem completely devoid of color. It was a loop.
And his day job? It was literally a perfect mirror of that internal void. He worked as a junior data verification clerk for this mid-tier logistics conglomerate. His entire universe was boiled down to a strict binary. Column A, digital shipping manifests. Column B, physical ledger printouts. He'd sit there and cross-reference thousands of rows a day, 5 days a week. If a serial number was off by a single digit, he flagged it. Column A simply had to match column B. He'd talk to no one, and he'd head back to his cramped apartment by 6 p.m., eat a sad microwave meal, and just sit bathed in the cold blue light of his TV until midnight. It was a loop with literally no end in sight.
Until, out of nowhere, on a random Tuesday evening in late autumn, the loop breaks. His TV, which was really his only sedative, his only way to feel like he was part of a world where people actually felt things, dies. Just a blown capacitor. It goes out with a sharp pop and a little wisp of acrid smoke. And without that distraction, the silence in his apartment became completely overwhelming. The walls literally felt like they were pressing in on him. So, just trying to escape the quiet, Arthur opens up his cheap, outdated laptop and starts mindlessly browsing the deep, unindexed corners of the internet. Just sheer desperate boredom, right?
Which brings us to part 2, a digital awakening.
Down a rabbit hole on an unregulated peer-to-peer text board, Arthur stumbles into this dark, underground digital community. It's a place where people are trading custom scripts and weird tools for exploiting websites. Out of pure curiosity, a feeling he hadn't experienced in probably 20 years, he downloads what's known as a crude toolkit. Basically, it's a social engineering framework designed to harvest user credentials by faking email interfaces, and honestly, it completely hooked his starved mind. He realized he could clone a corporate login page, hide a link in an urgent-looking email, and just log keystrokes. So he spends the entire night tweaking the code. He decides to test it on a local fitness center that had terrible security. He types up a fake server migration email, targets 50 members, and hits send at exactly 2:14 a.m.
The very next afternoon, Arthur is sitting in his gray, sterile office cubicle. He remotes into his home server to check the logs, and his breath literally catches in his throat. 14. 14 people had clicked his fake link.
But here's the crazy part. Out of those 14 clicks, 9 people actually handed over their full usernames and passwords. Boom! Right there in a neat, plain text file on his desktop. Arthur gets this massive, violent jolt of adrenaline. His hands are physically shaking. For a guy who has felt entirely invisible and powerless his whole life, the rush of absolute control was intoxicating. He had just manipulated the reality of 9 complete strangers. And just like that, the gray fog he'd lived in for decades was gone, replaced by this razor-sharp, genuinely scary brilliance.
As you can see here, things escalated fast. He completely tossed his old life out the window. He figured out pretty quickly that public forums and local targets were amateur hour, so he leveled up. He started targeting regional credit unions. He set up bulletproof hosting in remote countries to hide his tracks. He got really good at domain spoofing, swapping a lowercase l for a 1 so you don't even notice the URL is fake, and routed everything through multi-layered encrypted tunnels. He's selling these harvested credentials on dark web markets for crypto, but honestly, it wasn't even about the money for him. It was about validation. Bypassing modern digital defenses became his absolute obsession.
Part 3. The Fortress of Paranoia.
Now, you might be thinking, he's living the hacker dream, right? Well, no. This kind of power carries a massive psychological tax. By the following winter, Arthur's apartment wasn't a home anymore. It was a fortress. He swapped his cheap laptop for a massive glowing multi-monitor array. He nailed heavy blackout curtains over the windows, so he was living in this constant, self-imposed twilight. He literally stopped going outside. He'd only grab his grocery deliveries after he checked the peephole to make sure the hallway was totally empty. He was living in a state of perpetual hypervigilance, terrified that every single footstep or siren outside meant a tactical team was about to kick his door off its hinges.
And then, his worst nightmare actually happens. During a routine diagnostic sweep, he spots an anomaly. A deeply hidden, manual query originating directly from a federal forensic network pool. They were tracing him. They had found the very edge of his digital footprint. But here is the wildest part of the story. It didn't make him panic. Actually, scratch that. It did the exact opposite. His fear totally evaporated and morphed into this icy, megalomaniacal arrogance. He actually believed he was so untouchable that he decided to play a game at the feds. Instead of laying low, he plans his magnum opus, the ultimate heist. He targets a massive central clearinghouse for an international banking consortium. First, he spends 3 weeks mapping their firewalls, barely sleeping at all. Then, he plants false flags all over the globe to distract their security teams. And finally, he goes for the core repository data. It's this tense, hyper-focused operation, and it works perfectly. Millions of dollars start flowing into his encrypted offshore accounts. And that moment, he felt like an absolute god pulling the strings of the world.
Part 4. Project Icarus concluded.
It's 2:14 a.m., the exact minute he initiates the final data transfer. Suddenly, the pitch of his server cooling fans changes. Everything goes completely silent. His data transfer rate plummets straight to 0. His keyboards lock up. All his monitors wipe to pitch black. And then, very slowly, a single, high-definition live video stream pops up on his center screen. It's a live feed of his own room, recording his own horrified face. The feed was coming from the tiny webcam embedded in his monitor, a camera he had physically put tape over months ago.
Then, right below his own terrified face, text starts generating on the screen, one cold, robotic letter at a time. It reads, "Project Icarus concluded. Thank you for investing the infrastructure, Arthur." He's frantically mashing his hardware kill switch, but nothing's responding. In that split second, it becomes terrifyingly clear. He wasn't the ultimate predator. He was the prey, and the trap had just snapped shut.
The video feed disappears, and suddenly his screens are flooded with a dossier. But it's not a bank's data. It's his data. An immaculate, highly professional file containing his entire life. His real name, his social security number, the exact GPS coordinates of his apartment. Even the addresses and private keys to his secure offshore crypto wallets. They had absolutely everything.
And then he just has to sit there and watch as his cryptocurrency balances start counting down fast. The numbers cascade backward with this dizzying speed, millions of dollars just draining, until every single cent of the fortune he had built to validate his miserable existence hit absolute zero. They wiped him out in seconds.
But losing the money wasn't even the worst of it. A new window opens up, and Arthur realizes he's being framed in real time. His massive, beautiful server infrastructure was suddenly broadcasting highly classified government defense data, stuff he had literally never even seen before. And it was sending this data directly to the public servers of a hostile foreign intelligence agency. The entire data transfer was hard-coded to his apartment's IP address and signed with his cryptographic keys. He was being perfectly framed for international cyber warfare and high treason.
This is the moment his mind completely shatters. For a year, Arthur truly believed he was this brilliant, independent mastermind operating in the shadows. But the reality? From the very first night he downloaded that tiny, crude toolkit, he was being watched. He was cultivated and guided by a highly sophisticated, invisible syndicate.
They fed him easy targets. They lowered the barriers for him so he would obsessively build out this massive, bulletproof infrastructure, purely so they could hijack it when it was finished. He was never the mastermind. He was just a disposable proxy engineered from day one to take the fall.
Down in the street below, the darkness is suddenly cut by the flashing red and blue lights of federal utility vehicles swarming his building. Arthur is just sitting there, paralyzed in the glow of his monitors. He spent his entire life running from a loop of utter monotony, only to pour his soul into building the exact cage that would destroy him. As the heavy thud of tactical boots echoes down his hallway, and the deafening blast of a flashbang plunges his world into absolute darkness, it leaves us with one incredibly haunting question. When we're online, who is really pulling the strings? Think about that next time you log on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.